Okay, so we're holding in Perek Mem Vav Pasuk Hey. But I want to comment on something that we discussed in the previous year on Pasuk Dalid, where I explained that Yosef was made into an extension of Yaakov. And that's why we have Yosef Yoshis Yodoi, which eventually happens by Yaakov being Yoshis Yodoi and Yosef being Tomech Yad Aviv, thereby vicariously, we could say, or in partnership, Yosef was doing something with Yaakov. And that tells us that Yaakov and Yosef became identified as one. And that really supports the Pashup Pshat, which is that Yaakov will only die once he sees Yosef, which we explained in the past means Yaakov sees Yosef as his continuation. And therefore, if he sees Yosef, he can die, because if Yosef is alive, it's as if Yaakov is still alive. But I wanted to bring a proof to this. The proof is because Yaakov is told, Anochi erid imcha Mitzrayim, Anochi a'alcha gam aloi, that he will be taken up from Mitzrayim. Because he was told that, he told Bnei Yisrael to bring up his body after his death. Now, because he was told that Hashem will take him back up. But Yosef also did that. Yosef told Bnei Yisrael, his brothers, to bring back his bones with them when they leave Mitzrayim. Where does he get the right to do that, or the confidence that his bones will leave Mitzrayim as well? Melo Yaakov was told, but where does Yosef come off assuming that he's going to personally leave Mitzrayim? The answer is that what was said to Yaakov here applies to Yosef, because this passage teaches us that Yaakov and Yosef are identical. So Yaakov will die in the presence of Yosef. It will be as if he didn't die, and he will do something together with Yosef, and he will take Yosef's children and make them like his children, which is to say he's treating Yosef as if he's identical with himself, Yaakov. Okay, and Medrash says, when Yaakov made Yosef swear to take him out of Mitzrayim, so Yosef said, Anochi e'esek kidvarech, I will do as you, according to your words. Medrash says that Yosef was saying, I too will do the same thing that you're doing. Same way you're being mashbiah me to take you out of Mitzrayim, I will be mashbiah Bnei Yisrael, take me out of Mitzrayim. Okay, Pasuk Hey, Vayokom Yaakov mi be'er shova vayis'u Bnei Yisrael's Yaakovim. So he rose, and they bore him aloft. So the pasuk stresses that he had a kima. That's the Medrash says kima ha'isallai, because after hearing this message that Anochi ered imcha Mitzrayim Anochi a'alcha gam aloi, immediately it says Vayokom, because now that he hears this encouraging message, he is able to rise, and he has energy. He's uplifted, like we say metaphorically. Okay, and similarly, we have a similar thing in Parashat Vayetze, where he's leaving Beersheba also, and he has a dream where Hashem appears to him and tells him, I will be with you. And after that dream of Hashem telling him, I'll be with you and I will bring you back, similar to the vision that he had here, I will go down and I will bring you back up. So Perek Chavtes, it begins by Yisto Yaakov Raglov. After he had this dream of Hashem telling him, I'm with you, he picked up his feet and went. So it's having the dream that makes him confident, makes him pick up his feet. There, Vayisa Yaakov Raglov, here, Vayokom. Parenthetically, there's another connection to these two Beershevas, which is that there it says Vayetze Yaakov be'Beersheva, and he has his dream, and after that, Vayisa Yaakov Raglov, and he goes and he sees a be'er, well, and there it says be'er 7 times, which is of course an allusion to Beersheva. So he leaves Beersheva and he finds a new kind of Beersheva. Similarly, in our parsha, he's leaving from Beersheva and he's giving this promise that Hashem is with him, and L'goy Godol Asimcha Sham, specifically become a great nation. And the next story we have, or the next passage we have, is that Yaakov's family is Shivim Nafesh. So the Be'er Sheva here turns into a different kind of Sheva, turns into Shivim Nefesh, I think suggesting, just like the other Be'er Sheva turned into 7 Be'ers, we found his wife, so too now the completion of that is the Be'er Sheva turns into Shivim after he was procreated. Turned into Shivim. Okay, now, elsewhere we have this theme that when Yaakov is encouraged not to fear and know that Hashem is with him, then he becomes light-footed. This is in Yeshaya Seif Perek Mem, where the message to Yaakov is, don't say that your way is hidden from Hashem. Yaakov thought Hashem doesn't see him, and the Navi continues in Perek Mem Aleph, Ata Yisrael Avdi Al Tira Ki Imacha Ani. As we discussed this numerous times, this is echoing the message that Yaakov heard in Vayetze, and here again when he's going down to exile, that Hashem is with him. He thought Hashem was not. As we discussed, he brought Zevachim in Beersheva because he thought that he's leaving Hashem, and Hashem told him no. Don't you know, as the Navi says, Elekei Olam Hashem, God of the whole universe. Okay, now, what it says over there like that, what it says over there is as follows, in Yeshaya. Don't say, Yaakov, that your way is hidden from Hashem. Don't you know Hashem controls the whole world, so your way cannot be hidden from him. And lo yiyaf lo yiga, Hashem doesn't weary. Noisen lo yoif koyach. He gives strength to the weak. V'yi'afu na'orim v'yiga'u v'achuim kosher likashir. The young can become weary, worn out, and the young can stumble. So those who hope for Hashem, they'll run without being weary. And they will have a wing like eagles. So it's contrasting those who hope for Hashem with those who rely on the strength of their youth. And as we've discussed, there's a contrast between Yaakov and Yosef. Yosef relies on his youthful energy to stand in the court of Parai, and he was shloishim shana ba'omdoi lifnei Parai, which is shloishim lekoyach. Like it says, Daniel, asher koyach lehem la'amoid beheichal hamelach. And Yaakov was not 30, but 130. By Ya'amidehu lifnei Parai, they stood him up in front of Parai. He couldn't even stand. And about this it says, as we discussed numerous times, Shoykei Ish is a reference to Yosef, the young person. Rather, and there, of course, all the references in Tehillim Kufram Zayin to the story of Yosef and the fact that Hashem makes it rain. Okay, similarly in Mitzrayim, Hashem ultimately delivers Mitzrayim not through the strength of the young man Yosef, but rather which is Yaakov, who brings an end to the hunger through the Devar Hashem, Magid Devar of the Yaakov. Okay, we don't have to go back into that. Why am I telling you all this? Because we have this theme in Yeshaya Perek Mem that the young people can stumble, but hoping for Hashem is where their true strength comes from. So there's a contrast between Yaakov and Yosef. Yosef is strong physically. Yaakov becomes strong when he takes hope in Hashem. But Yaakov originally thinks that his way is hidden from Hashem, and this is something we discussed. Yaakov has a mile over Hashem, over Yosef, and Yosef has a mile over Yaakov. The mile of Yaakov over Yosef is that ultimately he takes his strength from Hashem. The chesaron of Yaakov, as this is all says in Yeshaya Perek Mem, the chesaron of Yaakov over Yosef, or the mile of Yosef over Yaakov, is that Yosef never says Nistar Adarki me Hashem. He never says my way is hidden from Hashem. Why? Because Yosef embraces Hester. He recognizes that Hashem wants Hester. Yaakov is shocked when Hester arrives, and therefore he's at first, when he's undergoing this whole story with Yosef and Mitzrayim, he is in a state of shock and thinks Hashem is not with him. Yosef never undergoes that, because Yosef embraces Hester deliberately, And that's why Yosef is someone who supports the physical prowess, which is to say something other than Kaveh Hashem, because he recognizes that Hashem made the world such that sometimes he's hidden. And not everything functions under the Dvar Hashem. Sometimes it's Hester. Yaakov stands for the one who recognizes that Dvar Hashem is the ultimate truth. By the way, Mizmor Lamed Gimel, which we keep on going back to, but Dvar Hashem Shamayim Nasu has the same thing. Sheker Hasos is Shuv Rev Chel Lemalitin Hashem Rev Nacham Lachasto Ilhatzal Mos National Rav. Who's going to be saved from the Rav? The one who doesn't trust in the falseness of the horse. The horse is like Lebi Gues Hasos. That's of course the might of Mitzrayim. And that's because B'Dvar Hashem Shamayim Na'asu. So everything is about the Dvar Hashem. Of course, this takes us back to the beginning of Pashas Vayeshev, where Yaakov sends off Yosef to find the Davar, V'Hashiveni Davar, V'Aviv Shamaras HaDavar. Yosef has to find the Davar. The hunger itself is a mashal for not Rav Lalechem, but rather Shema Dvar Hashem. And what's the point with all this? That Yaakov is someone who lives by the davar, and therefore he's Yachlifu Chayach. But if you live by the davar, then when there's something that goes wrong, you think Hashem is hidden. Really, of course, Hashem is not hidden, but it takes you time for it to adjust. That's the Yaakov story. Yosef's story is, I'm not shocked by Hashem being hidden. In fact, and the reason why I'm not shocked is because I deliberately jump right into it and embrace it in the first place. Okay, and the story of Yaakov and Yosef, this is very fundamental. And really, at some point, if you want to really understand what's going on over here, really get to unlock the messages here and the deep messages, you have to understand that everything has to happen through a combination of Yaakov and Yosef. Yaakov needs Yosef and Yosef needs Yaakov, and that has to do with, I'm pretty sure that has to do with the point we started with, which is that there's an identity between Yaakov and Yosef, because the point is that ultimately we need both of those kinds of people. And the destiny and the Yeridah to Mitzrayim has to happen through the two, and the interaction of those two. But I want to bring us back to Yeshaya Perek Mem. My point for now is like this. In Yeshaya Perek Mem, it says like this: look up to the skies. The end of the parak before that pasuk, it says, "Don't say your ways are hidden from Hashem." So Yeshaya Perek Mem pasuk Chavav, look up to the heavens and see mi bara ela motzim mispar tzva'am. The one who look up to the sky and see who created these stars, and brings out the hosts by number. Luchulam b'shem yikra, he calls them all by name. Okay, so none of them are lacking, and they all have name, and Hashem has roiv einim. Now roiv einim, this reminds us of Godol Ananin Rav Koyach L'Sunase in Mispar, Moina Mispar like Rechom Luchum Hashem Yisiko. That's from Kofram Zayin. We're going to see there's a lot of parallels here, and there it says he's Rav Koyach, and you remember it says in Lamed Gimel, Sheka Soshechula of Roiv Chila Lo Yemalet, and Gibur Lo Yinatzal B'Rav Koyach. So you don't want the Rav Koyach of the Gibur. You don't want Rav Choyel. Rather, you want what? Godol Ananin Rav Koyach. This one will say in Mispar. So there's a tension between the Rav Koyach, the Rav Chayil, and the Rav Koyach of Hashem. Okay. And the Rav Koyach of Hashem, his Tvuna is endless, and therefore he can count the stars. Like it says in Yeshaya also, see L'chulam b'shem yekam roiv onim v'amitz koyach ish lo neder. Now, we've mentioned this, I want to just mention this again briefly, and we'll see that it has to do with these psukim we're learning tonight. Yaakov said about Yosef, Rav, Oid Yosef b'ni Chai, Rav. And I think we found this in the Medrash. All right, the Medrash says, Rav, Yaakov said, Rav koicha, Yosef is better than me. Because I said, Nister Dakim Hashem, and Yosef never said that. Yosef was in Mitzrayim for these 20 years, and everything's fine. Whatever, close to 20 years, and he's still a tzaddik. So he doesn't, in other words, Yosef did not take the hester of being in Egypt, being in Golus. He didn't take that as a simon that he's away from Hashem, because he understands that Hashem acts in those ways as well. Yaakov is, when things don't go in the way that he understands Hashem should act, he sees that as a problem, as hester. Now, this is expressed by the word Rav. And remember we said there's the Rav Koyach of Hashem, and Rav Cheloi, and the Gibur Lo Yinotzal B'Rav Koyach. So on the one hand, Yosef is the one who is Mr. Rav. And what that means is like this. Multiplicity is something we don't control. So it stands for golos, it stands for being outside, is so much. We can't deal with the so much. We want something focused, unified, in order for us to have Das Hashem. Yosef embraces the Rav, and because which is to say, he embraces the Hester, the thing that includes the unity of Hashem. Because he embraces the Rav, therefore he doesn't say Nistur Darkei Hashem. While those like Yaakov who don't embrace the Rav are not able to deal with a kind of Hester until they are taught by Yosef that everything is fine. Okay. And there it says in the Perek Mem, Yalu Ever Kanasharim, then they grow wings. Those who are Kovei Hashem, Yechlifu Koyach. So this is like Yaakov who waits for Hashem to tell him to go to Mitzrayim, because remember the big difference in Yosef and Yaakov and the brothers is that Yosef went to Mitzrayim, or precipitated the descent to Mitzrayim even before the word of Hashem came telling him to go. Here is where the word of Hashem in our story is when Hashem told him to go. That's a whole different kind of descent to Mitzrayim. That's when Hashem is telling him to go. So he's the Kovei Hashem, Yechlifu Koyach, Yalu Ever Kanasharim, Yerutzu v'lo yigou, and that's why we have Vayokom Yaakov, Vayisu b'nei Yisrael es Yisrael Aviyam. Okay, and another thing is like this. There we said, in Yeshaya Perek Mem, it says, Yalo Ever Kanashorim. So where else do we have a Nesher leading? So there it's that they're going to be fleet like a Nesher. But in Hazinu it says, Hashem leads Yisrael like a Nesher. Hashem bad Kenesha Yair Kina, of course. Yisa'eu al Evrasai, so Yalo Aver Kanasharim, the wing. There, Hashem is the Nesher that bears aloft Yisrael on his wing. Hashem badad yanchenu ve'ein imay el necher. Hashem leads him by himself, and no foreign god is with him. And Psuk pride that it says, Yatzev Gvulos Amal Misbah Bnei Yisrael Kichelik Hashem Am Yaakov Chanos Nachlasei. The number of the people corresponds to the Misbah Bnei Yisrael. The next thing we have in our parsha is that there are Shivim Nefesh going down to Mitzrayim, and that's, of course, that's Shivim nations. Okay, I want to explain what that means. In other words, why does the fact that we are Badad, Hashem leads us Badad, no other foreign nation, why does that mean that that we have the same number as 70 nations? Because what that means is as follows. If we would be one nation like the other ones, then there's no reason why it should be 70. But since we stand apart, and we stand with Hashem, who is separate from all the El Necher, therefore, we are koilel all the 70 nations. How so? By having the same number as the 70 nations. The other Badad is in Parshas Bilam. Hein am levadad yishkoin v'agoyim lo yischashav mimana, who can count them. So the question about the number of Bnei Yisrael, Mispar Servei Yisrael, the question of Mispar Bnei Yisrael has to do with their relationship to the nations. And we're going to just try to understand a little better here in the Hemshech over here tonight, because we see the same thing over here, that when they go down to Mitzrayim, that's when they get this number of 70. When they go to Golos, that's when they're counted. Ve'elish mois b'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, Shivim, as the parasha ends. Okay? So what I'm pointing out from those connections is that those who are Kovei Hashem are led by Hashem like Nesharim, because Hashem takes specific care of them and keeps them separate from the other gods, and therefore from the other nations, so they're not among the other nations. And because of that, they have the same number as the other nations. So the point simply is like this, just to make that point again, make it clear. If the Yisrael will be a nation like all the others, then there's no reason why they would have within themselves the number of the other nations. But because they stand apart, so in a way they stand as correspondence to the other nations, you could say the way I was saying before, they include all the other nations within them, like Hashem includes, so to speak, all the El Nechar. So therefore they have the number of all the other nations. Okay. And here too, Hashem tells them, don't be afraid, you're going to become a good gadol, and don't be afraid of going into exile, which is being among other nations, because you have the number, which is corresponding to other nations, and Hashem himself leads you. Like we have in Hazinu, Hashem is going to take them like Malkam Neshama and bring them back to him, like we say in Parshas Yisrael. Okay. Pasuk Vav. They took their mikneh and their wealth that they were reichesh in the land of Canaan. Now, this pasuk is similar to two psukim about people that took all their wealth and went, but there's a difference. The difference is that another two psukim it says it took all their wealth, and that is in the end of Pashas Vayishlach, where it says Esav took as bandav, as benoisav, as kol nafshis, bes miknev, as kol behemtav, as kol kinyonei, and left, and to get out of the way. And when Yaakov left, ran away from the house of Lavan, so it says, Vayinag es kol miknei was kol rechusha asher rachash. Kol. Here it doesn't say kol. Why? I think very simply because the message was Va'enechem al toches al kalechem kituv kol atum saim lochemu. Don't worry about leaving things behind. So that's why, in line with that, it doesn't say they took kol. They took what they can grab and go, but it was very important for them to get to Mitzrayim quickly and to avoid the Rav, and it's okay to leave things behind because they'll get to kol atum saim. Now, the pasuk ends, Yaakov v'chol zarei itoi. Pasuk Vav ends that all his zera was with him. And this idea that Yaakov is coming and his zera is with him is made even more clear in pasuk Zayin, where it says, Banav, his sons. Pasuk ends all about Yaakov. His sons, Ubnei Banav, and his sons' sons, itoi, with him. Bnei Sav, his daughters, Ubnei Banav, and the daughters of his sons, v'chol zarei, and all of his descendants, Hevi, he brought itoi with him, Mitzrayim. Look at that. How many pronouns do we have in this pasuk? His sons of his sons with him, his daughters of his sons, and all of his descendants. He brought with him Mitzrayim. 8 pronouns about Yaakov. Okay, so the pasuk is making a point, just pashup pshat. Look at the pasuk. It says Yaakov brought them with him to Mitzrayim. Now, wait a second. Yaakov's going to Mitzrayim because there's a hunger. They have a hunger as well. They also have to go. Pasuk doesn't say they went. The pasuk says he brought them with him. So the pasuk is making a point that really Yaakov is the one who's going down to Mitzrayim. They're just coming along with him. And I think that's because you read this parsha, it's very significant. Yosef said you have to all come down for to get out of the hunger. But that's not what happened. Yaakov only came ultimately after Hashem told him, now Hashem was talking to Yaakov. So Yaakov went down to Mitzrayim after Hashem gave him his word and said, go, or don't be afraid to go, because I'm going to be with you. That's a reason for Yaakov to go. Why is everyone else going? So that's what this pasuk is saying. Everyone else is going because Yaakov brought them. Meaning to say, everyone else is going agav Yaakov, and in the same way that Yaakov was going. They're not independently going. Only Yaakov was going independently because he had the word of Hashem, and they said, okay, you know what? If Yaakov is going with the word of Hashem, we will go along with him. And by going along with him, what that means is they're going to participate in his destiny. They're going to participate in his destiny, and they're, as we find in Yeshaya, for example, Klal Yisrael is called Yaakov, Lamasom Yaakov. It's of course talking to Yaakov the person, but also addressing Klal Yisrael as a whole. So the fact that Klal Yisrael is going to be called Yaakov is captured right here, that they're going with him, and the Avtacha was to him, but the Shivim Nefesh is considered really tafel to him, such that we can have, let's say, a pasuk by Yar Yisrael, let's see, Haggadah, a good example of the nation being called Yisrael. And there the Zohar says, Yisrael means Yaakov himself saw it, because that's the point, that whatever's happening to the people is happening to them as Tfeilim to Yaakov. Okay. Now, here we get to Ve'ele Shmos B'nai Yisrael. So I'm not going to go into the Psukim inside. I want to talk about this generally. Now, as descent to Mitzrayim, we have a list of the names and a conclusion about them being Shivim. So I want to take you through a few parshiyos that correspond to this one here. And by doing so, we'll see a few themes and a few important connections. Okay, Yirmiyah Perek Chav Tes is also about families and procreation in Golos. That is in Golos Bavel. This is a perek we looked at last week. And the message from the Navi Yirmiyah to the people in Bavel was, build houses, live there, get married, have banum ubanis, take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to people, to men, and they should also have sons and daughters. Uvusham ba'altim atu. And this we spoke about last week because here it says, don't be afraid to go to Mitzrayim. So we spoke about the fact that there's one model of going down to exile, which timatu, let your family cease to exist. But as the Navi tells them, no, al timatu. Why? Because Hashem is going to redeem you in 70 years. So similarly, Yaakov was told, don't be afraid to go down to Mitzrayim. You're going to become a great nation there. That corresponds to this al timatu. And it's by virtue of becoming a great nation that Hashem is going to redeem you. Like it says at the beginning of Chumash, when they became so many, that's when ba'alam min haaretz, and that's what it says. We'll see soon in Hosea as well. We'll get to that in a minute. But here, what does it say in Yirmiyah? A very important pasuk. So the message to them was, have children, have grandchildren, and v'spallu shloim ha'ir. I'm sorry, v'dirshu shloim ha'ir she'galesim shalom. V'spallu ba'da el Hashem ki v'shloim ha'yelachem shalom. Why? Because in 70 years I will remember you. My good davar I will be making for you. What is that? So there's a good davar. The good davar is that Yisrael should be returned to this Makom Eretz Yisrael, and that's going to be set up in 70 years. So therefore, don't despair and don't say, I'm in a godless bubble, I'm not going to have children, I'm not going to be successful, I'm not going to seek the shalom. Rather, know that Hashem wants you to seek the shalom because that's going to make you survive and flourish so that you come back in 70 years. Ki pasuk over here, ki anochi yodati, this is in Chof Tes Yudalef, ki anochi yodati is a machshavas she'anochi chashav aleichem no Hashem. Because I know what I'm thinking about you. Machshavas shalom v'lo l'ra'ah. I'm thinking thoughts of shalom and not evil to give you an end and hope. Which is what? Etc. I'll bring you back. So I want to explain to you what does that mean. I know what I'm thinking. What's this interesting expression? I know what I'm thinking. The point is like this. In Golos, there's no revelation. There's no nevuah. So there's no understanding the ways of Hashem. What we're lacking is the Devar Hashem. And because we're lacking the Devar Hashem, we might think it's all over and we should let Yisrael cease to exist. But, says the Navi, even though there's no word of Hashem, meaning to say, the ways of Hashem are not explainable. The Nevi'im can't tell you why Hashem is doing what he's doing. Nonetheless, there's the machshava of Hashem. Machshava means like a secret plan that cannot be explained, but is nonetheless believed in. We know it's there. So there's a machshava of shalom, even though there's no devar shalom, and that's why you should seek the shalom ha'ir. And if you remember, we spoke about this a lot, that the Navi Yirmiyah is opposed to Yosef's guaranteeing shalom paray, even before he heard the contents of his dream. And yet over here, he's the one who advocates for V'spalu Shalom Ha'ir. Why is that? Because the difference is that Yosef ventured into Mitzrayim, support of Mitzrayim even before Hashem told him to go. In fact, he brought the Diba Ra as a way of precipitating some Ra, some Hester, that will lead to the descent of Mitzrayim. He engages in dreaming instead of Nevuah. What Yirmiyah wants is something that Yaakov did, which is that when Hashem says it's time to go, that's when I accept the Hester. Different model of Hester. Either we accept Hester, either we engage in Hester, embrace it, or we accept it when we are told. And then we have this sort of paradoxical thing, which is that Hashem is telling us that he doesn't want to talk to us. And that's when we could daven to Hashem, even though we're davening with Shalom Shalmachos. Okay, that's a different point. Now, but that's the point of Machshavos Hashem, that we don't have the word of Hashem, but we have his thought. Which is like Yosef said to the brothers, there's something called Hashem's thought, which is something we cannot articulate, i.e. we don't have Nevi'im in Galos, or there are states where we don't have Nevi'im, which is Galos, but nonetheless there's Hashem's thought, which is Taiv. Okay, now what's so important here that, look, what does Yirmiyah tell them? 70 years. And here we have Shivim Nefesh. So it seems to be connected. Shivim is an exile kind of number. 70 years in Galus Bavel and 70 nefesh corresponding to the 70 nations. Oh, so Shivim is a galus kind of number. And there in Yirmiyah it tells them, as we stressed those psukim before, sons, daughters, your son should get married and your daughter should get married. Here too it says about Yaakov that he brought banav, b'nei banav, b'nai banav. Okay, so it seems like Yirmiyah is darshaning our parashat at the least. Okay, and I'll explain to you what that means. I'll try to explain it a little better. I want you to turn to Hosea Perek Beis. There's another pasuk about the number of Bnei Yisrael. Perek Beis pasuk Aleph. Mispar Bnei Yisrael k'chol hayom asher lo yimad lo yisafer. So the mispar Bnei Yisrael will be uncountable. And then, when they become so many, v'nikpatzu, and there will be olam in Aretz. And later in that parak it says, so like we have in the beginning of Parashat Shmos, when the numbers increase, that's when they leave the Aretz. And there it talks about the number being uncountable, and Bnei Yisrael being uncountable. Remember the points about the stars being uncountable that we saw in Yeshaya and Kofim Zayim, Moedim Mispalak Chovim. Only Hashem can count the star because his tune is Einchik, it's beyond what we can fathom. Bnei Yisrael too is supposed to reach that kind of number. And when they reach that number, that's when they leave Mitzrayim and go up. So that's how you will get out of Mitzrayim. Okay. So what's this whole business about counting the stars? I want to explain to you what this means, I think, right? Let's bear that in mind. There's a whole theme about counting stars. Where's the theme? Hosea says, Mispar Bnei Yisrael will be like the Choil. Yeshaya says, you should look up the stars, heavens and see that Hashem can count and don't think you're hidden from Hashem. And Tillim Kufim Zayin says, Moedim Mispar like Chom L'chum Hashem V'sikra, God L'Indra Av Kosnas and Mispar, and that's how he wants Yaakov and not Yosef. Okay, so what's his Yaakov and not? So that's the whole star thing. Put that aside. We'll explain that in a minute. What's the difference between Yaakov and Yosef? We mentioned this before, but I'll just show you the pasuk in Yeshaya makes it clear. What was the taina against Yosef? So let's say it says in Yeshaya Perek Chav Zayin, Oz Yachazek b'ma'uzi ya'aseh shalom li shalom le'aseh. Look for Hashem's shalom. Haboim yashresh Yaakov. Those who are coming down to Egypt will take root. And then later in Perek Chav Tes, so there's the shalom of Hashem, shalom yaseli, that's ma'ozi, the strength of Hashem. And that's where Yaakov goes and takes root. And Yaakov will not be ashamed when he sees his family. That's the men of Perek Chav Tes. Perek Lamed begins, Hoy bonim soirim, the sons who are soirim, how are they soirim? Las is Eitzav Eloi Mini. They're doing an Eitzav not from Hashem, which is what? Going down to Mitzrayim without asking Hashem, lo'iz b'ma'iz parei. So there's two things. There's ma'uzi, the strength of Hashem, shalom yaseli. That's shalom Hashem. And then there's Yosef who said shalom parei. He's looking for ma'iz parei. That could turn into baishas because it's am lo yoyel. The difference is piloi sha'olu, not asking Hashem. Okay, as we mentioned before, Yosef embraces the Hester of Mitzrayim even before Hashem tells him. Yaakov waits till Hashem comes to him with a word. And that's what the Nevi'im appreciate that. The Nevi'im say, okay, when Hashem comes to you with his word, then you can, if the word is, go to Mitzrayim, now it's time for Galus, then you could accept the Hester. So Yaakov now has the word of Hashem, which is Galus, and like it says in Yirmiyahu, when you have the word of Hashem saying, like the Navi said to them in Bavel, it's time for Galus for 70 years, then V'haki Moisi is Davari HaTov. Then there's the Machshavas, which are going to lead to an establishing the Davari HaTov. So Yaakov here, perhaps it's related to Vayokom Yaakov, because now that he had the Davar Hashem telling him to go down, he knows there's a Davar HaTov, even if it's not present now, and even if it's going to take another 70 years, in the case of Bavel, or a multiple of 70, 420 in the case of Mitzrayim. Right. Right, it says that. Shloshim Shana, 430. Why did I say 420? I made it up. Okay, fine, forget that. Yeah, there's 400 and 430. Okay. Nimedu 210. Okay, multiple of 70. Okay, it doesn't matter. The kids are, so if we skip that point, the point is that when there's the davar saying go into Golos, then we know that there's going to be a davar toiv, even though there's going to be a hiatus that's called machshava. So by Yokom Yaakov is because now that he heard the Dvar Hashem saying go to Golos, he knows that Hakim Moisi is davar yatoiv, and all that Yaakov ever wanted was the davar, like it says Aviv Shomar Sadovo. Okay, now there are things we can't understand, and things that Hashem does we can't understand, and therefore we don't want to dabble in the world that we can't understand. It's Rav. It's not something we can it's not something we can tame and name. But you know what? Hashem names what's Rav, and that's the point over here. That's the point. I think it's all coming together with the counting the stars. Hashem is in the Shemaim. He counts the stars because he's Tuna's Ein Cheker. So even though there's a desire to know Hashem, which is what the brothers stood for, Yaakov stood for, and by that desire, when things happen that are inexplicable, we think in Nistor Dakim Hashem. But really, Hashem himself is unfathomable, and therefore you have to understand that your knowledge of Hashem is always going to be expanding. It's going to traverse through the hiddenness and become deeper because Hashem, unlike you, counts the stars. So this is what I think pulls it all together. In other words, through Yosef, who embraces Hester safely, in a way, because we said Yaakov can't, but Yosef could. Through that, we expand to a kind of knowledge that was originally beyond us because it's Ein Cheker, and that's through that mechanism that Bnei Yisrael goes from 70 to 600,000. So there's a going through the Rav over here and engaging with the Rav in a way that ends up being a blessing, like we have in Isaiah, that when they become many, they're going to leave Galus. And like we have in Yirmiyah, have children, and then you're going to leave Galus Bav in 70 years, but till then things are going to be hidden. Because this business of being increasing, which is to be like the Ein Cheker, to be like something unfathomable, is really fraught and dangerous and not something we understand and know, but Hashem does. And the way we get closer to knowledge of Hashem is by going to places that we don't understand, but Hashem does understand. And that's something that in order to appreciate that, there are things that we don't, Hashem understands, but we don't. And that's okay, because that's what it means to know Hashem. We should look up at the stars and see Mi Bar Eila. That's what Navi is saying. You should look up at the stars and say you created them. Look, Hashem counts them, even though you can't count. So don't think that if something is not explicable to you, that means that you are hidden from Hashem. That's the deep message over here. Okay, and that's how Bnei Yisrael becomes like a chavim. And I want to end with this, with two more Ramazim over here. This is unique to Yisrael. This is the mechanism whereby Yisrael becomes like numerous like the stars. And that's why Tehillim Kufam Zayin says, Magid Dvar Yaakov. So Yaakov is waiting for the Davar. Lo Yosechin L'chol Goy. And we have the same thing in Israel Gimel. Ashrei HaGoy Asher Hashem Alekov. So it's unique to the Goy that Hashem Alekov. Atzas Hashem Lo'olam Tamid Machshava Liba L'Doy V'Doy. There's the Machshava of Hashem's heart, which is not his word. And that goes the Doy V'Doy. Sometimes it takes 70 years, like the length of a dart. It takes 70 years for that to become manifest. But the Goy Asher Hashem Alekov eventually finds that. That's a unique kind of nation. And going back to Yeshaya Perek Lamed, so without going back into all those psukim, but there it talks about the day that Hashem is going to be chayvish shever amoed machatz makasa yepa. So that's like kuf lam zayin right for the shvurei leiv umechabish la'atzavoisam. So Bnei Yisrael is going to come back together. They're going to become united when they become shvurei leiv, and that's what makes them star-like. That's what makes them with Hashem in Shemayim and uncountable, except by the one who is himself of unfathomable tfuna. He's the one who showed it on the Rav, on the multiplicity.